I heard, as it were, a trumpet talking with me, which said, "Come up here, and I will show you the things which must be hereafter." And immediately I was in the Spirit. Now, just as a reference, we talked about resurrection. We talked about being resurrected from the dead, and how a resurrected body is not the same thing as a spiritual body. This says, immediately I was in the Spirit. The resurrection is not in the Spirit. The resurrection is when our bodies are changed. We still have physical bodies. It's just that they are no longer bound in sin. We become a species of being, a creature that did not exist before. When you look at Jesus post-resurrection scripture, we see Jesus did not look the same when he died. We read the scripture before how when a grain of wheat is sown into the ground, it doesn't come up and look the same. It's not like you plant a piece of corn in the ground and the piece of corn is just gigantic and big and it just pops out of the ground and it looks exactly like a kernel of corn. No, it comes up as a stalk, it's got ears, so you plant that little seed and it grows a plant that looks much different, right? When we look at Jesus after his resurrection, Mary Magdalene, who was with him for 3 years, did not know who he was. She thought he was the gardener. The disciples who were on the road to Emmaus did not know who he was. They spent 8 hours with him and Jesus unpacked the scriptures. They never knew who he was until they ended up breaking bread, and when he ended up blessing the meal and their eyes were open, scripture says, their eyes were open, they knew who he was and he vanished from their sight. Jesus is frying fish on the side of Lake Gennesaret. The disciples are out fishing. They see him. Jesus says, "Hey, come and eat." And they're like, "Why is this strange man asking us to eat?" And it says that Peter perceived that it was the Lord. And so he jumped over. But it was only because Peter had this thought, that's got to be Jesus. But he didn't know. And when you read that account, Jesus' interaction with Peter seems to show all the way through that Peter's trying to feel this out. He's not sure. It's like he's like edging his way into this conversation, still believing it's Jesus. Ultimately, I think it all clicks together because Jesus, again, leaves the disciples and then they go and finish their day. So when Jesus is resurrected, he didn't look the same as he does now. Neither will we, right? So I hope when I get resurrected, I get Justin's beard. I want his beard. He's got a great beard. I hope that I get a full beard and I don't have all these patches, right? I hope that I get a beard when I get resurrected. Now, will I? I don't know. That's God's decision. I don't have any idea what I'm going to look like. But I know I won't look like this, and I'm going to trust that I'll look better. Right? Let's keep going. He that sat, immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven, and one sat on the throne. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. Now, if you look at jasper and sardine, these stones, if you look at them, you can Google them and look them up. They're a blood red stone with stripes that go through it. Blood red with stripes. So you can imagine, what he's saying here is the one that sat on the throne was the color of blood with stripes. So who do you think that was? He that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow around the throne in the sight like an emerald. And around about the throne were 24 seats. And upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about who these 24 people are. Anybody got an idea? Thoughts? Anybody online or otherwise? Because we know 12 for sure, and I think we can surmise who the 24 are. Give up? Nobody online? Anybody? No?
Prophets?
Nope.
Isaiah?
No, that's a good one. I hadn't thought about Isaiah. So let's do this. Let's go to Matthew 19. Go to Matthew 19:20. Let's see here. Matthew 19:28. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Matthew is the first gospel in the New Testament. Matthew 19:28. Jesus said to them, speaking to the disciples, see at verse 27, Peter answered and said to him, "Behold, we, the disciples, your apostles, we have forsaken everything to follow you. What will we have?" In other words, what are we going to gain? And Jesus said to them, "Verily I say to you, that you, which have followed me in the regeneration, when the Son of Man will sit in his throne of glory, you also will sit upon 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So we know that 12 of the people on the thrones are the apostles. And you can also, if you're taking notes, you can look at Luke 22:30, and then later on we'll read in Revelation 21. I don't know, let me go look real quick. Revelation 21:10, let me see if it's anything that we're going to cover now and then go back. I'll just take a peek real fast. Revelation 21. Oh, yeah, I do want to read this. So here's where we fill in the other 12. So go to Revelation 21. We're going to fast forward. We're going to go to the end of the book of the Revelation, almost all the way to the end of the Revelation, Revelation 21. So we know that 12 of the thrones were owned or were seated by apostles, 12 apostles. And we'll talk about Judas in a minute, because Jesus said that while Judas was still with them, which is kind of interesting. 21:10 says this. Actually, let's start with verse 9. There came to me one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials of God's wrath. And he spoke with me, saying, Come here, and I will show you the bride, the Lamb's wife. He carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Verse 11. And having the glory of God, and her light was like to a stone most precious, even a jasper stone, clear as crystal. And it had a great wall, and had 12 gates, and on the gates 12 angels, and names written on the gates, which were the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. So here's the new city, here's the holy city, the New Jerusalem, which we're going to read a lot about as we continue this study. We talked about the day of the Lord. The scriptures that we'll study about the holy city, the New Jerusalem, also known as the mountain of God. Well, there's a fun section of scriptures on that we'll talk about later on in the study. But the 12 gates were the 12 nations, the 12 tribes of Israel. On the east, 3 gates. So in other words, on the east side of the building there were 3 gates. On the north there were 3 gates. On the south there were 3 gates. On the west there were 3 gates. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So here's what I'm thinking, systems analyst brain, right? We know that the 12 apostles are already 12 because Jesus said that they would be sitting on 12 thrones judging with him, judging the nations of Israel. And I'm looking at this saying, well, if the 12 apostles have 12 foundations, then it would make sense to me that the 12 gates represent the 12 tribes. So I'm wondering, and we don't know, there's nothing that says who the other 12 are. I've never found anything that specifically says. But if the apostles were worthy of foundations of the building, and the 12 tribes were worthy of the gates of the building, it would make sense to me that there would be some representative of the 12 tribes of Israel that would be sitting on the other 12 thrones. So I think what we've got is a member of the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles on the 24th. So that's what I think. Y'all study it yourself and see what you come up with, but that's where I landed. Let's finish this here real quick. The wall of the city had 12 foundations, on them the 12 apostles of the Lamb. And I'm looking here. We'll save the rest of it for later. We're good. Okay. So let's go back to Revelation 4 and keep going. Anybody have thoughts or questions before we keep going? Anybody online? Thoughts, questions? Nope. Awesome. Okay. So, verse 4. Around about the throne were 24 seats. Upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed with white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. Okay, I'm sorry. I've got to tell you one more thing. This is one of those scriptures that I love for one totally space age thought. Right? This is one of those time travel things. So